as Tammy said, I'm the managing director at the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice at Harvard Law School. I want to share my excitement about being part of the 16th annual National Blackprelaw Conference and Law Fair. I'm sorry that we can't be together in person, but it's just been an incredible few days, and it's very exciting to be here. The Houston Institute was founded by Harvard Law School professor Charles J. Ogletree Jr. in 2005 to honor and extend the legacy of Charles Hamilton Houston. I hope most of you know who he was. Houston was a Harvard Law School graduate who went on to become one of the most prominent and successful attorneys of the 20th century. His legacy includes extensive litigation around a multitude of issues, including several appearances before the Supreme Court. Of course, he's best known and remembered as the architect of the strategy that led to the unanimous Brown v. Board of Education decision that reversed the separate but equal doctrine established by the 1893 Plessy v. Ferguson decision. But Houston was not only the first special counsel of the NAACP from which he launched that particular part of his career, he also served as the vice dean at Howard Law School. In that position, he transformed the law school from a largely night school to where his father received his degree, to a top-notch training ground for Black attorneys. The Brown decision itself was issued 4 years after Houston's untimely death, under the guidance of Thurgood Marshall and other attorneys trained by Houston, including Oliver Hill and Spotswood Robinson. This combination of efforts earned Houston the mantle of the man who killed Jim Crow. When Professor Ogletree sought to create an institute at Harvard Law School that could train lawyers to pursue racial justice, Houston was a natural model. The Houston Institute follows Houston's lead by incorporating cutting-edge social science, just as the Clark-Doll experiments animated the Brown decision. But we also follow Houston's example of incorporating organizing and advocacy, anticipating what's now known today as movement lawyering. And Nkechi Taifa stole a bit of my thunder the other day, but you can't be reminded often enough that Houston once famously insisted that a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. And we take this insight to heart. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I find Houston's admonition applicable across the spectrum of careers. We must all locate ourselves somewhere on that continuum between social engineer and parasite. It's exactly thus with Charles Ogletree, one of the most important lawyers and trainers of lawyers over the last 40 years. Just as Houston is known as the mentor to Thurgood Marshall, Professor Ogletree is known as the mentor to Barack and Michelle Obama. But as was true for Thurgood Marshall in relation to Houston, the Obamas are only the best known, as Ogletree has also followed in Houston's footsteps as a trainer and mentor to a generation of attorneys spread across the country. And like Houston, Ogletree was a powerful litigator. He cut his teeth as a public defender in Washington, D.C., experience he carried with him as not only formative, but as his most important. This from a man who, in defending Anita Hill, established quite a different relationship to our current president-elect, who chaired those hearings. But he also represented folks like Tupac and Buju Banton. Ogletree also used his voice and influence outside the courtroom and the academy, and this is critical. Whether advising South Africa on its constitution, standing with former Black Panthers being harassed by police, or just as likely responding to a call from a local resident who had experienced an injustice. He would travel to Caddo Parish, Louisiana, to join in protesting the flying of the Confederate flag at a courthouse, which has since come down. He and his wife, Pam, were co-founders of the Benjamin Banneker Charter School. There's so many ways that Ogletree found to be a social engineer. His impact at Harvard Law School is legendary and timeless. From the Saturday School lectures and Martha's Vineyard forums, free and open to the public, featuring a wide array of thinkers, engaging in important and timely conversations, to the Criminal Justice Institute, the Harvard Law School clinic for students to gain firsthand experience in trial situations, to the renowned Trial Advocacy Workshop and intensive multi-week training conducted by the most accomplished and effective lawyers and litigators in the country, presided over by sitting judges. And finally, with the Houston Institute, my organization, Ogletree has been about the business of social engineering for justice. Our work at the Institute has evolved to focus on what we call community justice. I challenge each of you to ask yourself how you define justice and make that your guiding star, regardless of what branch of law you pursue. I would only ask that as you do so, you eliminate the term criminal justice from consideration. I have written on this topic elsewhere, but will simply say that the term itself triggers long existing associations between Blackness and criminality that we must begin to sever by finding a new language. On our website, charleshamiltonhouston.org, you'll find those things typically labeled as criminal justice under a term we call safety and healing, as these are the issues we find members of our community care about. After subjecting myself to this exercise of reflecting on the meaning of justice, I have come to understand justice as meaning to be made whole. It surely has a certain resonance with the law, which you probably recognize, but also with public health, which we see as the most important guiding force for understanding the needs of our communities. This perspective from community health and the social determinants of health opens, and justice as being made whole, opens new vistas and points for us in a different direction from that we've engaged. It recognizes that there are instances of harm that require attention and action. Yes, it's true, but that attention must have an affirmative rather than merely punitive aspect. To be made whole orients us toward repair and restoration rather than crime and criminalization. Community justice is the term we use as we think about our policymaking framework. The term grows from our recognition that the wars on crime and wars on drugs were fought in our communities against our people. We believe if we, the people, is ever to have any truth, it must include all of us. Community justice looks to members of our communities with direct knowledge of the issues they face and the policies and practices that will address those issues, to craft solutions, to be at the forefront of conceiving, designing, implementing, and evaluating public policies that affect them. That makes we the people real. Here, our definition of justice has special resonance as we understand the dire need to make our communities themselves whole. This process will require a form of rebuilding similar to the Marshall Plan that followed the devastation wrought by World War II. And thus we launched the Houston Marshall Plan for Community Justice. We believe we need such a plan driven by community justice, with funding going to individuals and organizations working on the ground every day in every city in the country. We're heartened to see that there's movement toward this, with participatory budgeting occurring throughout the country in many, many cities. This, of course, comes close to the notion of reparations, literally to repair. Reparations today has become possible in polite society, whereas it was not always so. Indeed, Professor Ogletree began to fight for reparations years ago, specifically for the victims and descendants of the Tulsa massacre. I've been going back over his talks and was struck by a lecture he gave at Harvard, where he reminded the audience that he and his colleagues, Ogletree always worked in a team, and you should remember that. We're pursuing the matter without pay. Indeed, he said his fight for reparations was not for a check for him and the other Lexus and BMW drivers in the crowd, but for those he called the bottom stuck. It's the kind of term few of us would use, but its clarity is inescapable and evocative. Those most in need of being made whole, most deserving of justice, are those who have been locked out of our social, economic, and political realms. And so I leave you with this thought. We're often reminded or told that the door of opportunity seems forever open to some in our society, but closed or hard to open for others. Our common language and practice is that we need to open the door wider, leave it open longer, or even take it off its hinges completely. But this will not solve the problem. It feeds the mythical meritocracy where a limited number are admitted. It will let some of us, probably many of you, through. But if we're going to follow the example of Houston and Ogletree, once on the other side, once inside and availing ourselves of opportunity, we must apply our engineering skills to dismantle that very wall that separates us, that holds the door. That wall for Black people is racism. There are other walls excluding others, but until those walls come down, our society will not be whole, and we as social engineers are obligated to attack that wall. I really want to thank you for listening and for being able to join you today. And finally, I want to give a special thanks and shout out to Evangeline Mitchell, who takes her place with Houston and Ogletree as a preeminent social engineer of the 21st century. Thank you.